Hi everybody, this is Warren Herman, and today we're going to speak about a really important shift that you can make that's going to completely change your life and how you deal with mental states if you apply it. The way that I'm describing it, it can really be a game changer for you, so I want to share this with you because it can really make a difference. So, what I'm sharing today is a simple technique, and this is a technique that's really helpful no matter what type of issue you're dealing with in life. This is a technique that when you understand it, it becomes a kind of like a framework that you can use to apply to whatever kind of struggle you're having. Because here's the thing, whatever type of mental state that's bothering you, it usually has a certain structure to it. Things that bother us are kind of like usually a loop in our head, like a tape loop that plays, that kind of is giving us problems. It's almost like we're stuck in these loops that we can't resolve. We might be stuck in a thought of anxiety. We might be stuck in a sense of guilt or a scruple. We might be caught in a sense of doubt about our faith. Whatever it is, it has the same kind of structure. Basically what happens, it begins with a sense of like you see something that makes you all of a sudden wonder maybe something terrible is happening. And all of a sudden you're starting to second guess yourself and think about this thing in your head. So I'll give an example. Like let's say somebody says something about the Bible and you say, oh no, maybe the Bible is false. And then you go, you start wondering, it's trying to analyze and all these different things. Or let's say somebody says something, somebody makes a suggestion that something might be sinful, and you go, oh no, this might be bad, this might be a bad thing. You start to kind of wonder about it, you start to ruminate on it, because you start to have, there starts to be a sense in which you start to kind of say, maybe this is this way, and you start to lose this kind of clarity and simplicity of mind because your mind starts to go into the realm of maybes and fantasy. So it goes off into fantasy land, and fantasy land is a bad place. It's a bad place to be because it's always, things of what if this happens? Maybe this is the way it is. Maybe this is that. Oh no, it's like a world of doubt and instability. It's a dream, a hypnosis of confusion. You're kind of caught in this fantasy land and you lose touch with reality. And the reason why you lose touch with reality is because there's a fear, or there's something underlying it. So for example, in the face of an anxiety or a scruple, maybe you say, oh, maybe I'm a terrible person. That could be the fear. And then you say, oh, I did that. Maybe that means I'm a terrible person, whatever it is. Maybe I sinned. Maybe I'm going to go to hell. There could be this fear. And then we look and we analyze, start to wonder, maybe so, maybe. But of course, these are usually matters about which we don't have certainty. It's not like I'm not talking about, okay, yeah, I killed 30 people yesterday. And now I wonder, maybe it's bad. Yeah, it's bad. But this is more when someone is having, obsessive fears. These are kind of when our mind is in a loop. It's not when something is obvious and clear. And so the thing is, this method that I'm going to share is the way out of fantasy land, is the way out of this stuff, is the way out of these things. And the problem is that usually what we do is that when we have these kind of problems, we almost always try to fight our way out. We try to use our willpower to break through, or try to force our mind to think something different. We try this way that doesn't work. And so what I want to share with you today is the way that works. And what I'm going to share with you is very subtle. So I don't want you to judge the effectiveness of what I'm about to say, because the effectiveness of what I'm going to say is actually quite good. But you have to understand what I'm saying. Because here's the thing. I'm going to explain it now in just a few words. You have to notice how you are safe. You have to notice how God is keeping you safe in the moment. That's what you need to do. You have to notice what He's doing to keep you safe right now. By doing that, and by doing whatever version of that corresponds to the mental state that you are in. So for example, let's say I'm doubting my faith. Let's say I have a fear. Maybe the Catholic Church is not the true church and the Orthodox Church is the true church. I mean, am I going to be able to like prove that beyond any possibility of doubt? No. But I can make a reasonable case for the Catholic Church being the true church. And I can know a number of things that would make that case. I could have a bunch of arguments, like the ability to call ecumenical councils, so that might be one thing I could look at. Like the Catholic Church could call ecumenical councils and the Orthodox Church can't, in a meaningful way, do that. So if I stare at with my mind, so rather than try to say, okay, how am I going to ever believe fully that the Catholic Church is the true church? Well, don't do that. Just look at the evidence that it is. Just allow your mind to notice the arguments for it being the true church. And the more you allow your mind to notice those arguments and to kind of rest on those arguments, then that is the way that safety and security is generated. There is a necessity to look at the source of security, a necessity of noticing these things, a necessity of noticing these markers of truthfulness about the Catholic Church, for example. And you notice those things, and those things give you the ability to say, as you stare at them with your mind, with your ability to notice, you say, okay, I'm just noticing the ways that it's the proofs. I'm noticing in my mind, I'm calling to mind those things that support the Catholic Church being true, vis-a-vis the Orthodox Church. So this is all you have to do. Don't try to fight with everything. Don't try to argue against all the things in your mind. Rest with your mind on the proofs that you know. And by doing this, you're going to be putting into a cognitive framework. You're going to be putting into a mental method the essence of what happened to St. Peter when he was on the water. When he was walking on water, St. Peter, they see Jesus coming toward the boat. St. Peter gets out and he keeps his eyes on Jesus. And when his eyes are on Jesus, he is able to stay afloat. He's able to walk on the water. And so since he's able to do that, we see this, we have this beautiful, historical, miraculous story, but we also have this beautiful metaphor for what we're going to do in this life of faith. And the life of faith has to be based on a kind of seeing, a kind of spiritual sight. And so this kind of spiritual sight is something that is so important, because this is something that is really critical to our spiritual lives. If we don't use this kind of spiritual sight to keep our eyes on the proofs for what we want to have proven, or so in this case, with the proofs of the Catholic Church, we will be living in the world of doubt, which is what happens to St. Peter when he begins to look at the wind and the waves and the danger of the situation he's in and how weird it is that he's walking on water. All of a sudden he starts to sink. And that is the case with whatever type of mental state we are dealing with. There's always the possibility, for example, like let's use a simpler metaphor. You could imagine somebody on a tightrope going over a great space. There's always the possibility that they can look down. And if they look down, they'll be scared. We can always look down. We could always find reasons to doubt. Doubt that the Catholic Church is true, for example. But we could always also look up and see reasons for it being so. And what we put our focus on is going to determine our emotional state. And the thing is, we don't ever want to try to calm down. This also does not work. So on one hand, you don't want to just try to you don't want to say, okay, let me argue with every single let me try to figure out everything and know for certain and go crazy researching. You can do research, you need to, but don't go crazy, for example, researching things in a compulsive manner. Don't, don't try to, do that approach, because then you're fighting with the different thoughts and you're fighting with those things. What you want to do is you want to be able to just look at the good reasons. And the element here is like you don't look at those things. It's like you're not trying in this approach to just change your feelings. You're not trying to say, hey, I want to have that certain faith. I want to have that feeling of believing. You just, because that's going to mess things up. You're going to instead just look at the reasons to believe. And when you look at the reasons to believe, the feelings of belief are the natural outgrowth of that mental gesture. And so you're dealing with the problem at its very root. And so this is why it works so well. And so you almost need to do nothing about this problem. You almost need to do nothing about, like, let's say you're having trouble. Of course you have to do some research. If you're having doubts about the Bible, you have to do some research, but don't go crazy about it. Look at the things you can believe. And then start to, build the case for the reliability of the Gospels. Watch some videos about that. And then look at the evidence that you have and lean on that. And so this is a way of phrasing this thing. It's very much like St. Peter looking at Jesus rather than the wind and the waves. And the more we look at Jesus, the more we calm down, and the more we can walk across, where we can walk on water. And so this is the method that is going to change everything about how you think. The reason why this is so important is because this works with scruples as well. So for example, scruples is a technical term for kind of challenges of conscience, in the spiritual life. Worries about whether something is sinful, or whether you've sinned, or whether something, have you sinned? Have you done something incorrect? Did I make a mistake with this or that? And the way you get around this is you can't, like, when the fear response kicks in, there's this blast of panic that whenever maybe I sinned, whoa, you can't settle it down directly. Put your eyes on your uncertainty about whether you sinned, and the knowledge that, with a and this is a principle in the treatment of scrupulosity, is called when in doubt, it doesn't count. Like, so for example, you don't doubt whether you killed somebody, it's like if you've done something terrible, you'll know. And it's like you have to realize what's going on, and you have to realize how you're safe. I made many videos about this much earlier, about the treatment of scrupulosity, because sometimes scrupulosity leads to a fear of temptations that makes the temptations worse. And so this fear of temptations amplifies the temptations, and until you know that's what's going on, you're going to think your life is exceptionally threatening. And so it's so helpful to be able to realize that that's what's happening. So again, it's all about gathering evidence of how God is keeping you safe, or how you are safe. Because then once you see, okay, these are not temptations necessarily. I'm just so afraid of temptation that things are whatever it is. I don't want to be judgmental. Why did I think a judgmental thought? Why did those thoughts pop in my head? But it's because you're terrified of those kind of thoughts. Once you understand what's going on, you gain understanding, you have clarity about what's happening, it brings about a sense of safety, the scruples calm down. And there's a bunch of videos about this that explain this process much more in depth, with regard to scruples. But again, it's about understanding what's happening without seeing the facts. It's about seeing the facts that make it so that you're safe. It's about the facts that overcome fear. It's about looking at the fact and about the face of Jesus. And, it's like that's really what we're trying to look at, rather than just falling into these fears. That's what we're trying to do. So it's, again, let's say you're dealing with scruples. Scruples have two elements, the rumination about whether you sinned, and the amplification about all the sins that could be happening. So it's like, once you understand how the amplification happens, like let's say I'm afraid of judging people, then I go to church and I say, I see that person. I think that they're, whatever it is, like I think that they are a bad person or whatever it is, then I don't want to think that thought. Once I don't want to think that thought, it amplifies that thought and it makes it pop into my head. It's not like, I'm willfully doing that. It just pops in. And then if you realize, all of a sudden the fear appetite makes it so amplified that it seems as if your mind is consenting to it, because like it launches it into mental apparatus, and it bounces there, and whatever the appetites associated with judging people move toward it. You say, oh, I feel like I consented to it. But if you don't understand the way in which that process is working, you're going to think you're consenting to judging everybody. But instead, once you understand what it is, it builds safety. It builds safety. And so that is why it's so important, or let's say, another way of doing this is like when you're not certain, in scrupulosity, it's like if you're not certain that you've done something wrong, you could be certain, someone with scruples can be certain they haven't. You can use lots of evidences like this. Do you habitually do that? Like, do you always try to deceive people or whatever? And if you realize that that's never what you try to do, you always try not to do that, you kind of had a slip of the tongue, you said this and that, you obviously were trying to tell some huge lie. It's like you can use these other evidences, and by looking at them, again, it's like looking at Jesus, like Peter looking at Jesus. You don't try to calm yourself down. You don't try to break yourself out of these mental states. You don't try to even tell yourself, hey, I have a mental problem. I must have OCD. I must have scrupulosity. It's like, no, your brain's working right, given the information you've given it. It's freaking out because you're giving it information that's terrifying. The thing is, if you have to look somewhere else, and then you will also walk on water. That's what happens when you look at the right things. When your brain is looking at the right things, it's having the right feelings eventually. It's made this like not exactly a 1-to-1 ratio, but your job is not about feeling better. Your job is just to look at the face of Jesus and the facts of the situation. If you look at those things, the fears or whatever is going on will be resolved. The same thing with temptations. We could be really freaking out about, oh, am I going to be tempted by this or that? Just be in the situation. Start to notice the way God's keeping you safe again. Just like notice, oh, it could be perceptually, oh, look, God's keeping me safe because all of a sudden I'm noticing the sense perceptions around me. Okay, I'm not, and this could be a way out of, people could be really afraid of becoming attracted to people or different temptations toward impurity. Just start to notice. Don't freak out. Just start to notice the ways that you're safe. Just start to notice the ways God's keeping you safe in that situation. Notice, if you need to know that information about, oh, your fears are just amplifying those first movements of sin in that situation, understand that. Gain understanding of how your mind's working in that situation. That generates safety. If you're just saying, oh, I'm here, let me just notice how I'm safe and how God is, keeping me safe. I'm doing something, I'm interacting with somebody. Notice how God is keeping you safe. It's so important to notice that, because if you put your attention there again, you're going to be walking on that water. You're going to be able to just kind of go through that situation without making a crazy amount of weird effort to control yourself. Like you're just going to kind of go around it. And that's so important, because or else your life is good. You're going to be driving yourself crazy. So this is a very important technique. And I hope that this description of noticing the facts of the situation and understanding, how is, the question you ask is, how is God keeping me safe here in this situation? Or how am I safe in this situation? And again, it's you have to apply it to the mental state or the type of pattern. You're just looking for the thing. You're looking for what you want to find, as opposed to trying to fight off the feeling that you don't like or the facts that you don't like. You're looking at the evidence you have. It's like, it's kind of like what happens. It's choosing to be your own hypnotist, but again, I think a better understanding of reality. You're not just making things up. You're allowing yourself to look at the cues that show you're in reality, rather than the cues that might indicate the digression off into a fantasy land of fear and problems and all kinds of things. You're paying attention to the evidence of the truth rather than the evidence of falsehood. Because, it's like the things that come up that make us doubt our faith, or the things that come up that make us fall into all these different kinds of fears, they are, apparent issues. They look like, it would be like somebody tries to, let's say, somebody tries to frame one of your family members for like robbing all your money, and they put the other person's fingerprints on the handle of, the safe, and they do all these things. There's some evidence, but then again, you then look and you say, okay, well, what do I know about this person? This person doesn't need any of this money. That was their own money that's in the safe. What's going on? This doesn't make sense. that doesn't make sense at all why they would do that. You look at the other evidence that you have, and then you put the things together in the right way. So this is really about looking at the things that we know, focusing on that, just like St. Peter focuses on the face of Christ, on looking at Jesus rather than looking at the wind and the waves, and being able to walk on the water. And so I hope this is helpful to you as you think about how to deal with doubts about your faith, as you deal with scruples, as you deal with temptations, as you deal with all kinds of things. And and it can work with forgiveness as well, because you don't need to try to force yourself to forgive. What you do is you look at the pains that the other person has. You look at the reasons why they did what they did. You put out the fires of resentment by looking at the ways in which the other person was suffering, at the ways in which these just facts that give you understanding. Then you also can look, well, how was God merciful to me in this situation? Well, okay, maybe I didn't do as badly as I could have, done in my response. There's all kinds of ways God was merciful. You're starting to see that, all the different ways of seeing ways God was merciful, seeing ways God kept you safe, seeing ways that you are safe, or as we said in this forgiveness thing, we want to change that safety into a proper nullification of the negative mental state. In this case, compassion is what you want to be cultivating by seeing not threat. You don't want to be looking for threat, but you want to be looking for the other person not being a perpetrator, but look at how they are a victim of their own mental states. And then your compassion will arise. And so it's deeply important, that when we are faced with a negative mental state, to look for the opposite type of evidence. So for example, fears, we would use safety, seeing someone as as an enemy, we would use ways that we could see them as someone who's hurting, someone on whom we could have compassion. Whatever it is, this is that spiritual or psychological equivalent of looking at the face of Jesus so that we walk effortlessly across the water with him. And so this is so important for the spiritual life. And I hope that by giving these examples, I've been able to convey how this powerful technique can completely revolutionize the way that you experience your life. And it's so important because when we find something like this, it can sound really simple. It could seem maybe kind of, like that can't be that important. But if you've lived out the suffering of trying to change your feelings directly, if you've lived out the suffering of trying to white knuckle your way day in and day out through temptations, through scruples, just with this, you're going to see the deep value of freedom that is possible to this technique. So I hope this is helpful to you, and feel free to ask any questions about this in the comments. I hope this benefits you in your walk with Jesus and your walk toward him, looking upon his face, looking upon the facts, saying, how is God keeping me safe in this situation? And being open to seeing the evidence.